20 years after a brutal homicide took place in Chicago, police just want to know from you, do you know Fernando? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kevin Clewer. Viewer discretion is advised. Kevin James Clewer was born on April 7th, 1972, and he was actually born in Hammond, Indiana. He was the second child, and he only had one brother, an older brother. His brother would later say that, the older brother was 7 years older. He remembered, growing up as a kid, being really, really close with his brother. But by the time the older brother was now a teenager and Kevin was still in his younger years, they kind of turned into that, how brothers are, and I hate you and all that kind of thing. And so for a couple years there, for 4 or 5 years, they just were normal brothers who didn't really get along that well. But then by the time more time had passed, the two of them became really close again. His brother described him growing up as this chubby little curly-headed kid who just loved getting dirty and being outdoors and just being a normal boy. As he got older, Kevin matured and he became just this really well-liked, funny, intelligent guy. He was super energetic and fun-loving and full of energy and life. He became an uncle, and when he became an uncle, it was the proudest moment of his life. He absolutely adored his niece, and his nieces said they always looked for Uncle Kevin at every family gathering, that they just loved being around him. One of his nieces would say that they really, really looked up to their Uncle Kevin a lot. He instilled in them, to always make sure you're showing others kindness, respect, and to just make sure that in any given situation, make sure everyone is as happy as you can make them be. Kevin was also incredibly sociable, and he loved hanging out with his friends. He had a ton of friends. He loved going out to bars and just shooting the shit with people. Back when Kevin was in high school, he made I can attest, the very tough, the difficult sort of choice to come out as gay to the people in his life. And I think everyone's always waiting with bated breath, how is the family going to react? How is everyone going to respond to this? And luckily for Kevin, and for me too, his family they were proud of him. They loved him for who he was. They didn't bother them that he was gay. As a matter of fact, for Thanksgiving and Christmases, he would bring over guys that he was seeing, and the family treated those guys like they were family as well. The family was incredibly welcoming and very supportive of Kevin through that. And then by his late 20s, Kevin would decide he wanted to kind of start his life. He wanted to go somewhere where he may feel more himself. And so he would move to Chicago, Illinois. And that is where he was living at the time of this case. It was March 23rd, 2004. 31-year-old Kevin was hanging out with his friends like he always loved to do. They were going bar hopping on North Halsted Street. They had gone to, I believe, at least 3 different bars, and this was a normal thing they did. And at the final bar they went to, Kevin met a stranger, a man who identified himself as the name Fernando. At the end of the evening, Kevin, invited Fernando back to his apartment, to Kevin's apartment. I believe Fernando at least stated to him that he was gay. Whether or not he actually is, I'm not sure. And so, by everyone's accounts, this Fernando person went back to Kevin's place with him. And unfortunately for his friends, that was the last time they would ever see Kevin alive again. The following day, Kevin did not show up for work, and that was extremely unlike him. He was someone, if he was going to miss work, he was going to call. His work got no phone calls, and so his family found out that he did not show up for work, and they immediately were like, something's wrong. And so Kevin's dad, I guess he had separated from Kevin's mom at some point, but Kevin's mom had called Kevin's dad and said, hey, can you please just go check on Kevin? I guess his dad lived in the area at this point. The dad goes to the apartment and he tries to open Kevin's door, but it seems to be locked. He's banging on the door, knocking. He's getting no response from Kevin. And so he's just something feels off. Something is wrong. And so he manages to essentially, bust the door down or open, and he gains entry to the apartment. And he finds something that no parent should ever have to find. It was an incredibly brutal scene. In his bedroom, Kevin was lying on his stomach, I believe on his bed. I mean, the bed was just like saturated in blood, and Kevin had blood. His entire shirt was just bloody, and there was very clear like marks on the shirt that indicated stab wounds. Kevin was dead. There was no chance of saving him. When police arrived, they secured the scene. They collected as much evidence as they could. I believe they found the murder weapon just somewhere outside. It was like this, kind of like a steak knife is what it looked like. I don't know if they think that more than one knife was used, because the knife they found wasn't like covered in blood or anything. But when the coroner got Kevin, they determined that he had been stabbed 42 times, and every single stab wound was to his back. So Kevin was likely already lying down on his stomach in bed when his assailant stabbed him repeatedly. There were no defensive wounds on Kevin. He had no stabs to his hands or arms or his legs or anything indicating he tried to fight back. So probably those first couple of stabs really probably incapacitated him, and he couldn't do anything. And then he was stabbed 40-ish more times. When police are questioning all of his friends, they find out that they had gone bar hopping the night before, and that Kevin had left the bar with a man named Fernando, and that Fernando was going back to the apartment with Kevin. Police were like, okay, we got to know who this Fernando guy is, because by every account, he's likely the last person to have seen Kevin alive, if not being his killer just in general. They were able to get a composite drawing of this Fernando person by getting descriptions from all of the friends, and they passed this flyer out with his face all over this neighborhood, throughout all of these bars, throughout the apartment building that Kevin lived in where he was killed. They were passing it out everywhere, and they were just hoping against all hope that somebody would recognize this man and know who he was. Police from the get-go, it didn't sound like they believed that Fernando was his actual name. By some descriptions that people gave, they believed that Fernando was likely Puerto Rican, and there is a good chance that maybe at this point he fled back to Puerto Rico. In terms of the motive, they believe that this was probably a robbery. I don't know if they actually stole anything or what they stole, and there's a possibility that Fernando just posed as a gay man to get inside this apartment to rob Kevin. And, you know, they didn't know each other prior to this meeting at the bar, and so this was a chance encounter. And in a situation like that, where, you know, nobody actually knows this guy's name or anything, it's very difficult to find this guy. I don't 100% know if they have, actually, I feel confident they don't have fingerprints or the killer's DNA, and I'll get to that in a minute or two here, but it doesn't sound like they do. And so at that point, they believe Fernando is the killer. They just need to know where he is and who he is. So the case actually ends up going pretty cold pretty fast. Sadly, within a year, by 2005, both of Kevin's parents, within weeks of one another, both pass away. And they never got to find out who did this to their son, and they never got to see justice get done. His brother has continued to fight and seek answers and get any kind of closure they can get. And that would lead to about 2020, when I think it's his brother received a Facebook message from somebody. And police in 2023 would announce that this Facebook message has led them to the identity of Fernando. From what it sounds like, the Facebook message came from a neighbor who was a neighbor to this Fernando person. They recognized him based on the sketch. And so police in Chicago were able to follow up on this, and they found out the identity of Fernando. However, they have not publicly stated what his actual name is. But it does sound like Fernando is for sure not his name. They did confirm that Fernando was in fact from Puerto Rico, and when they finally were able to track him down, they found him in Puerto Rico. And they discovered that he had previous convictions and offenses for like prostitution and non-violent type crimes. They interviewed people in Fernando's life, and they all said that he's never been known to be a violent guy. The only crimes he's really committed are things like theft and prostitution. They also learned that through Fernando, there may have been actually a second man involved in this attack on Kevin. But again, who that person is, it's not known. Now, here's where I feel confident that police don't really have fingerprints or DNA, is because they have basically stated that this Fernando person, whose name they're not releasing, they believe he is the one. They believe he is the killer of Kevin. But they said basically, quote, identifying a suspect is one thing, but proving he is the suspect is a whole other. Because, the way this works is you can sit there and say, I'm pretty confident I know who did this. I know who killed this man. I know who wielded that knife, and I know who stabbed him to death. I know it, but I can't prove it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, you have to be able to prove it. You have to have some type of evidence to show for sure that this is the one who did this. And unfortunately, as of 2024, as of me filming this, they don't have that evidence. They want to make sure that if they are going to go to trial, that they have the evidence to convict his killer. They don't want to roll the dice and say, we think it could be him. All we have is this circumstantial stuff. And then the jury's like, but there's a lot of reasonable doubt now, so we can't convict. They want to be able to convict him, which, it's admirable. I think that's definitely good. And so they are really needing the public's help, especially those who live in that neighborhood in Chicago, and even people who may know this Fernando person in Puerto Rico. They need your help. They need to know if you know anything. That if Fernando, whoever he may be, has fully confessed to the crime to someone, if he has revealed information that nobody else should know about this murder. Simply because they've identified who Fernando is, it does not place him in that apartment and stating that he did it. They need more. And so they need your help to find that. Something else that came to their attention was, I guess there were very similar attacks that happened, I think, once in 2003 and another one in 2005. So just before and just after Kevin's murder. And they believe that Fernando and this other individual who is linked to him may have been responsible for those attacks too. I don't really have any information though on those attacks. We can't just, I should say we shouldn't just arrest people based on a gut feeling or instinct. We should only arrest people once we have proof. But, as I say that, we all know that's never really always the truth or the case. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, has got to have the answers. It sounds like he has spilled the beans to some people, and not all of these people have come forward. And there's a good chance you might be afraid of this individual, that he may harm you. So if you do have information, you can always report whatever you know anonymously. You do not have to say who you are at all. You just have to say what you know. There is a chance Fernando might have also used the name Francisco and also Adolfo, is what police have uncovered. So you may know him as Fernando, Francisco, or Adolfo, or something different. The image of Fernando, based on what I can see, is a pretty accurate rendering of what this man actually looked like back in 2004. Maybe you have photos of him that you can go, oh my God, that's him. And maybe you have something somewhere, just anything. If you have any information about the murder of Kevin Clewer, please contact the police at 312-744-8261. If you know anything that can help bring this man or these men to justice, please do so. Please help Kevin and his family get the justice they all very rightfully deserve. Another day, and yet another murdered or missing Indigenous woman who some people just seem to want you to forget. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kaysera Stops Pretty Places. Viewer discretion is advised. Kaysera Stops Pretty Places was a 18-year-old Indigenous woman who lived in Bighorn County, Montana. Everyone who knew Kaysera said she was always happy, always had a smile on her face. She seemed to be everyone's cheerleader. She would always put her friends and family before herself. She cared deeply for others. She was described as a responsible young adult, and she was very active in the community, the local community, and very active within her tribe. It was August 24th, 2019. Kaysera was invited to a party at a local friend's house there in Bighorn County, Montana. I guess specifically in the city of Hardin, Montana. The plan was that she was going to go to this party, have a good time, and likely just crash there that night and then come home the following day. But she did not come home the following morning, or the following afternoon, or the following evening. According to, I guess, friends at the party or witnesses from the party, it was then in the very early morning hours now of August 25th, 2019, where Kaysera was seen outside of the home that she was at for this party, which I guess was located on Rangeview Drive. She was observed outside with two of her teenage friends and also a 23-year-old man. And again, she's 18 years old at the time of the story. Some witnesses claim that an argument broke out amongst this little group. I guess they got loud and a neighbor nearby decided to flash their lights and I guess set off their car alarm just to get them to these people to stop yelling. And so I guess Kaysera and this little group just sort of kind of bolted in different directions, which stopped this argument that they were having. Whatever that argument is really unknown. And then Kaysera was seen going back into the backyard of the house where the party was at. So, when her family realizes that Kaysera is missing and no one can really seem to say exactly what happened to her or where she went from this party, her family, her grandmother who she lived with, tried to report her missing because Kaysera was not someone who would just not call, not show up. This was very unusual because who knows her best? Her own family, right? But police couldn't, I guess, be bothered by it. They didn't even file an actual report or anything. They did nothing. They basically just told the grandma, just, you know what? Figure it out yourself. The following day, on August 25th, now one of Kaysera's aunts goes to the police station and says, okay, she's still missing. It's been about 24 hours now, and she's still gone. Apparently, the Bighorn Sheriff's Department, whoever they spoke to, said, well, there's a waiting period. You gotta wait a few days before we can report her missing, which actually in Montana is not true. Not true at all. There's no waiting period. 4 days later, August 29th, 2019, a man was just driving around this neighborhood, the same neighborhood where Kaysera was last seen at the party, and he notices something kind of what appears to be sort of on the side of the road, kind of near a fence, like a chain link fence. He gets close and realizes it's a body. It's a female body. So he alerts police immediately, and the police go and they collect the body. And it's essentially right next to the backyard where Kaysera was at that party. He's right there at that backyard. Here's the crazy part. She wasn't like decomposed, and you could still see pretty clear identification on who this person was. Police didn't notify the family at all. They didn't notify Kaysera's family, despite at this point now knowing that Kaysera is a missing person, knowing they've seen her pictures. They didn't tell her family. You want to know when they told her family? September 11th. We're talking weeks after she was found. They didn't tell them until then. The coroner did, I guess, a routine autopsy. They found no toxins. They found no drugs in her system. There was no illnesses or anything like that. There was no injuries that would have maybe been caused by an accident. They couldn't rule out things like asphyxiation, but there was allegedly no stab wounds, no bullet wounds. She could have also been beaten, but they never listed anything like that in the report. And then it gets so much worse. The coroner who did the autopsy, I guess, was the county coroner who apparently owned the morgue himself. His name was Terry Bullis. He said that Kaysera's body had to be cremated before even asking the family. Her grandmother, her uncles, cousins, none of them were notified that the coroner was planning to cremate her. I guess Kaysera's mom was told the plan was to cremate her by this coroner, but she said, "No, you will not cremate my daughter. We have our religious beliefs. We do not want her cremated. We do not consent." He did it anyway. He cremated her body anyway. And you know what happens when you cremate a human body that may have been murdered? All of that evidence is gone now. Forever. You can't get it back. So, no one can exhume the body and say, well, we want a second opinion on this autopsy. No one can confirm whether or not maybe she was beat to death. Now we can't say if she was asphyxiated. I guess a witness told Kaysera's family that when Kaysera's body was recovered, the witness, I guess, saw it. They saw one of the officers take a cell phone out of Kaysera's pocket. The friend thought they were taking the cell phone out to call and notify the family, but that never happened. So what were they doing with her cell phone? Here is where it gets a little even shadier. Allegedly, a few days before Kaysera's death, Kaysera posted a video somewhere. I can't exactly say for sure where, but it was video of a police officer or a sheriff's deputy abusing her brother. To what degree, I'm not sure. But Kaysera had video evidence of this. And then a few days later, she's found dead. The autopsy is vague, with no real, true cause of death listed. They're not saying homicide, they're saying undetermined. And then they cremate her body, despite the family saying, you will not cremate her body. That is shady as shit. Apparently the coroner did do some due diligence, I guess. I guess they scraped under her fingernails before they cremated her, and I guess they found no traces of DNA, so no evidence that she had scratched maybe an attacker. Now, I do want to say, the video evidence of the police abusing her brother, that has yet to be actually confirmed, so take it with that. It may not be true, but according to some witnesses, it is very much true. Could have absolutely nothing to do with the police. Maybe the police in this case are just really bad at their jobs. Or maybe they legitimately didn't have any evidence. You can't just focus on them being shady, because also Kaysera was seen arguing with a group of people. She was found right behind that backyard of the house where the party she was at. That would indicate possibly someone in that household or at that party did something to her, not police. I guess I have just a lot of mixed emotions about this because just obviously of a lot of things here, but I have very little to really say in terms of the information because things weren't collected properly. Her entire body was cremated. So now we'll literally never know how she died, what killed her. That's a huge thing to know. And so now they will never know. Was it the police retaliating for some video that allegedly was taken? Possibly. Was it these friends she was arguing with outside of the house where the party was at? Possibly. Was it maybe the person who threw the party in general? Had they talked to him? Apparently they have, but there's not a lot of information on what these people have all said. Information is very scarce on this. What I do understand is that there are, I guess, new police working on the case, I think, but there's nothing new to report on it. This was, a few years ago now. It's just so frustrating when you have stories like this. It seems like a victim, another Indigenous woman, is killed in some regard, and it just seems to be meh, let's not bother with it. Why? Why is that the case? Why is it? I've never understood why Indigenous women, especially, get this level of disservice. I don't get it. She was a person. She was an 18-year-old child, basically. She had barely experienced adult life. And she goes to a party to have fun and then winds up dead. And now we don't know how she died, why she died. We don't know who did it. Are police truly investigating this still? Unfortunately, this is just a very vague ending to the story. And that is unfortunately the story with so many cases like this with Indigenous women. And it has to stop. It has to stop. If you do have any information with regards to this case, again, it's only a few years old, so there's people out there who know what happened. Someone knows. Someone is out there that knows. And maybe that person is you. You can always report information anonymously. You can contact the Bighorn Sheriff's Department if you feel comfortable doing that. You can always email them, report things anonymously. I just hope that if you do report something, I hope they actually take that information and do something with it. A man was essentially convicted by car. Yeah. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jenna Gamble. Viewer discretion is advised. Jenna Lynn Gamble was born on September 19th, 1981, and she was actually born in Mesa, Arizona, which is nearby where I live. However, at the time this case occurs, her and her family were now living in Modesto, California. Jenna attended high school at Bayer High School, and she was actually in her freshman year when this case occurred. She also had a brother named Garen, and by all accounts, Jenna was your prototypical teenage girl, got good grades, was popular, but, you know, teenagers are going to be teenagers, and sometimes they, irritate the parents. And, Jenna would find herself grounded on more than one occasion, not allowed to use the phone to call her friends. And as a matter of fact, that is where Jenna found herself when this case occurred. That takes us to October 14th, 1995. Kathy Mauser, who was an aerobics instructor, would leave the house that morning, which was a Saturday morning, to go to her work. When Kathy left the house, at the home still was Jenna and her husband, Douglas. His name was Douglas Mauser. Before Kathy leaves the house, though, she does remind Jenna, hey, you are grounded this weekend, and so absolutely no using the phone at all this weekend, and especially while I'm gone. Jenna basically says, okay, Mom. And then Kathy leaves the house, not realizing that's the last time she's ever going to see her daughter alive again. Kathy Mauser then arrives back home sometime around 1 p.m. And when she does so, at this point, there's no one there. No one's home. The door was locked, which was also unusual because there was always someone at the house, always. And so to come home with the door locked was very unusual already. But when she entered the home, no one was there. There is no reason she could think of as to why Jenna wasn't home. She did know that her husband, Douglas, was planning to go to work that morning. And so at that point, she becomes concerned for Jenna. Where is she? What has happened here? There's no sign of a struggle or anything in the house. There's no indications that anything violent or bad happened. It's just an empty house. Well, Jenna would soon be located. About 20 miles from where the Mausers lived, the body of a young female was found. This young woman was completely nude, and it was clear that she had met with a violent end. The body would very quickly be identified as 14-year-old Jenna Gamble. She had been strangled to death. When the coroner had the body, he determined that not only has she been strangled to death, that was her ultimate cause of death, but there were at least a couple different blunt force trauma injuries to her head. Someone struck her over the head, maybe with a punch, or they didn't really know for sure. Jenna, who had no clothes on and especially no shoes, had no dirt on the bottoms of her feet, which meant to them that she was not forced to walk to the area where she was found. It told them that she was likely murdered somewhere else and then dumped in that location. When police looked at the phone records, they found out pretty quickly that Jenna broke the rules in place for her while she was grounded that weekend. Almost immediately, time-wise, after her mom left, there were phone records to indicate that she did call her friend that morning. And I think she made actually a couple calls that morning. But she had been speaking to her best friend, and the best friend would later tell police that when she was talking on the phone to Jenna, suddenly the call just stops. Jenna just hangs up. And what that tells the friend is that Jenna was likely interrupted by a parent. Because if someone had broke into the house, a stranger that she didn't know, and they just burst into her room, certainly there would have been a scream, a loud sound, something, but that didn't happen. If it was like a boy that she had been seeing or something that kind of came in, Jenna would have just said to her best friend, oh, hey, so-and-so is here, I'm going to go now. And so that really told people that it was likely her mom or dad who saw her on the phone or was walking into the house, and Jenna had to suddenly hang up the phone. Now, the friend would later recount to the authorities that the conversation she had with Jenna on the phone was completely normal. They talked about their normal teenage girl stuff. Jenna did not indicate that anything was wrong, just that she was grounded, which was, normal. Jenna's friends would tell police that there were a couple of guys who were like 18, 19-year-old guys who seemed to at some point be infatuated with Jenna and was essentially preying on Jenna because, again, she's 14 years old. They narrowed it down to one guy in particular who may have done something to her, but apparently, according to the prosecution later and the police, that individual had a solid alibi at the time that this would have happened. And so who was the next likely person? They also ruled out the brother. The brother had nothing to do with this. And so they next went to Douglas Mauser, her stepdad. He had been in her life since Jenna was 2 years old because, Jenna's parents had divorced a long, long, long time ago. And according to Jenna's friends, her and Douglas had a very decent relationship. Jenna seemed to like Doug. They got along for the most part. Nothing like would ever jump out and say, oh yeah, Douglas abused the kids or screamed at them all the time or something like that. There was really nothing out of the ordinary, just your typical, dad yelling at a teenage person for doing something wrong kind of thing. Nothing substantial that really jumped out to anyone. So they want to know where Douglas was that morning because they want to be able to rule him out. Well, he said he went to his job that morning for a couple of hours. He worked at a federal research facility, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And at first, police looked at this and go, okay, he has an alibi. We can confirm his alibi, right? Well, not so much. So Doug says he was at the office during the time frame in which police narrowed down as to when she was kidnapped and murdered, or murdered and then just in the house and then dumped somewhere. When the police question one of the guards there who has to open the gate to let people into the facility, the guard says he does not recall seeing Douglas there at all that day. When they asked Douglas, well, can you describe the guard you talked to? He couldn't do it. He could not describe the man he saw that he says he saw that would let him into the facility. This is a guy who has been working, Doug, at this facility for a very long time, who knows a security guard, sees him all the time. So it's kind of strange to them that he wasn't able to describe the security guard he said he saw. And what that told police was, he's hiding something, he must be guilty of this. But you cannot just say a person is guilty and convict them without evidence. So what was any evidence they may have had against Doug? Well, pretty shitty evidence, if you ask me, and a lot of people. When police searched the Mausers' house, there was not a single sign or indication that anything happened in that house. No struggle, no forced entry, there were no blood spatters anywhere, no pulled out hair, nothing. There was nothing in that house to indicate anything bad had happened. So next they look at Douglas's car. And it's the car that to police and later the prosecution would say was a landmine. It was full of forensic evidence. It wasn't, though. When they looked in the car, again, there's no blood, there's no pulled out hair, there's no DNA that's not Douglas's, there's nothing to indicate a crime or anything or a body being transported or something in the car. What they did find underneath the car, however, was some vegetation. Specifically, they found yellow star thistle underneath the car, which told them that he had driven that car in an area with this yellow star thistle. But here's the thing. In that area of California, pretty much all over California, yellow star thistle is extremely common. This is not a rare plant. Odds are you're going to be driving somewhere and eventually you're going to get that thistle under your car. It's just because of how common it is. Well, at the dump site where, the body was eventually found, there was an ample amount of this yellow star thistle. So that told them that he must have driven the body to that area to dump her. But they could not state that it was the exact same yellow star thistle underneath his car that was found at the dump site. They can just say they're in both locations. But again, this plant is found everywhere. And so again, they ask him, are you sure you were at work that morning? I mean, we have this yellow star thistle now. It's at the dump site and under your car. Can you explain that? How can you explain to us and give us evidence that you didn't do this? We said, well, again, I have an alibi. I was at work. Outside of the security guard thing, no one else seems to be able to physically place Doug at his place of work at the time this would have happened. There really wasn't many people there. And the next thing they saw was that there were cameras at this facility. And when they go to check the camera footage, of course, the cameras were not operating at that time. So there was no video evidence of him going there. He also tells them, okay, well, I went to a Jack in the Box that same morning during that time frame to get some food. They go to that Jack in the Box. Unbelievably, they have cameras. They weren't working that day. That's an insane coincidence of bad luck. And then no one could identify as seeing Doug that day at Jack in the Box either. So his alibi appears to be shot. The star thistle appears to place him at the crime scene. But that's not enough. That just isn't enough. They're not going to be able to prove it's the same star thistle. Well, next they get a little creative. When Jenna was found, not only did she, have strangulation and blunt force trauma, but she also had they don't really want to say they were injuries, they were marks on her thigh, on her leg, that jumped out to them. They're like, okay, well, can we identify these markings on her leg? And one detective was going over Doug's car again and looking at it closely. And one thing they noticed is that half of the back seat was up, the other half was flattened down. And that's because that seat was broken. So it was permanently down. But it was also the perfect angle to kind of put a body in without really struggling much. Then the detective takes an even closer look at the seatbelt. And the seatbelt it had a familiar pattern to him. He said, well, there is one marking that looks very similar to the top of the actual seatbelt itself, the place where you would put the buckle into. And then he noticed that the carpeting on that seat that folded all the way back, when he lifted it up a little bit, he saw this long, straight line of fabric that had like these little, markings on it where they would sew it or whatever. And so they take a photo of that and they line it up with a photo of the markings on her leg. And they say, according to them, the same long mark that was found on her thigh matched the pattern on that carpeting in the car, because they said when he probably put the body in the car, it moved the fabric, it bent it to then have that line of fabric pattern onto her leg. Now they wanted to test this theory, so they got a model, a woman who was the same size, weight, and everything as Jenna. They had her lying in the same position that Jenna would have likely been laying in the car, and they had her do that for about 15 to 20 minutes, because it took 15 to 20 minutes to get from the Mauser's house to the dump site. And I guess, lo and behold, they discovered that there was those same markings, or very similar markings, on the test model. And so, boom, there you have it. That's it. That's the evidence. That's the evidence, folks. That is the evidence. That's it. The car. A car is what convinced them, the fabric. By the way, this is the same car that he had been driving, Doug, for a very long time, a car that Jenna had been in numerous times. It's possible those markings could have come at those times, or it's just a similar looking pattern. Could they say with absolute certainty that pattern on the carpet was the precise same pattern found on her thigh? No. But it convinced the detectives, so they arrested Doug Mauser. He denied having anything to do with this. He thought they were crazy. But they said, hey, listen, you can't describe a security guard that you see all the time. Suddenly you can't describe him? The security guard says he doesn't see you there that day. We don't have any footage to show that you were there. We have no one to place you there. Well, they also would look to his office, and because he said he was in there working on his computer. And when they go in there to look at his computer, there really wasn't any sign that he had actually been working on it that day. It doesn't mean he wasn't there, though. It just means that during a certain time frame, he wasn't using his office or his computer. We don't have the footage from you at the Jack in the Box because the cameras weren't working, but no one there who worked there could recall seeing you there. They also see a bunch of people every single day. They're not expecting to have to remember a person. And so that's very explainable as to why they wouldn't recognize them. They see hundreds, if not thousands of customers a day. But still, they charge him with her murder and they go on trial. At trial, they put up the witnesses who testified about the yellow star thistle, but all the experts that were brought up, that included defense experts and prosecution experts, that stated that you cannot say with certainty that that's the exact same plant from the same area. And again, they reiterated that that plant is so unbelievably common that it's just, you cannot rely on that as being any evidence in this case. You just can't. And so that was basically a wash. Then they brought up this one expert who's an expert, a specialist in photogrammetry, the practice of using mathematical calculations to uncover information about a picture. Okay. So this expert noticed or thought that the patterns on her body were done post-mortem after Jenna was already dead. And that's why the indentations were so strong on her body, because the way the blood works in a person who is no longer alive. But also, here's the other problem with that, is that you can say the patterns look similar, which is what this guy said. Now, by the way, other experts also came up to say you can't say that definitively. This includes defensive experts and prosecution experts that stated the opposite. Like, you could say it was from Doug's car, but you also can say it wasn't from Doug's car. Because how do you narrow it down to his belt buckle and his carpeting? Many cars are going to have something very similar. The seatbelt especially is going to be extremely common looking. And that fabric, it's not anything unusual. It's not a signature stitching or anything. It's what you're going to find probably with most cars. But they just kept going with it. And the prosecution would come up with this theory that Doug had been there that morning. He had gotten into the shower and he got out of the shower to get ready to go to his office for a few hours. But as he was walking down the hallway, he heard Jenna talking on the phone when she wasn't supposed to be. And again, this is something, Jenna would push the envelope. She would push buttons, because she's, again, a typical teenager. This is not just a her thing. It's all of them, basically. And they said he flipped out. He got really angry at her, constantly disobeying her being grounded and just doing what she's not supposed to be doing anyway. And that, according to prosecution, set Doug off. And he punched her. He hit her in the head, which would explain the blunt force trauma injuries to her head. Realizing immediately, holy shit, I just punched her and I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to lose my job. So I have to get rid of her. Theorizing that she was going to be able to rat him out. And so he had to kill her. That was their explanation. Her own mother basically defended Doug, saying, I don't think he did this. There were other people who said there's just no way. He is this nice, perfect neighbor. He's this good friend. He's a good guy. His coworker said he was great. He was wonderful. Even Jenna would say it, early on in her life that she enjoyed Doug, that they were close. And her friends would also state that Doug appeared to be really good with her. But that doesn't mean, because how often do you hear stories like that? Oh, he was so nice. You never would have thought, We see it on all true crime stories almost. It's always the person you don't expect to do it that actually does it. And if I'm being, honest here, I think that theory of she disobeyed these orders and Doug just kind of lost it in that moment and hit her. That actually makes sense. That tracks. Because he would lose everything. He would lose his job. He would lose his wife. He would lose everything. He would go to jail. And so he tried to make it look like somebody else did it. Maybe a boy that she was seeing. Maybe a boy that was stalking her. Maybe that's why she was nude, to give the implication that she had been sexually assaulted. Which, by the way, forgot to mention, the coroner found no signs of rape at all. There were no defensive wounds on her. And if this was like a boy that came after her and she knew it and saw it, she would have defended herself. But Douglas, her stepdad, being someone that she's always pretty much gotten along with, maybe he's yelling at her. She's not going to expect him to throw a punch. And so that's why there was no defense wounds, perhaps. The prosecution's job is to prove someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Whether you think Doug Mauser actually did this or not, like whether you personally feel that, there is no physical evidence in this case that says he did this. All they have is very flimsy, very generic circumstantial evidence. That is it. They have many people who are standing up for Doug's character, but that again doesn't mean he wouldn't do something like this. But the evidence is so minimal that I am amazed that the jury came back with how they came back. And they actually deliberated for days and days. This took them a long time. They found Douglas Mauser guilty of the murder of his stepdaughter, Jenna Gamble. Did he do it, though? You know, I coming from someone who's from the outside looking in, I don't know. Do I think it's possible he did it? Absolutely. His alibi didn't check out. He lied potentially about his alibi. The neighbors would tell police at some point that there was, loud arguments that would happen, that tempers would flare up in the Mauser household, that Doug wasn't this saint that everyone said he is, but he's also not a monster. He's just sort of like your typical, I don't know, stepdad or whatever. But doesn't every family have tempers that flare up from time to time when kids are misbehaving in the household? Parents yell at their kids. It's normal. It's not criminal. There was no evidence that he ever hit any of the kids or anything like that before. And so doesn't it seem more likely that she was killed by an unknown assailant, possibly a stalker, possibly one of these older boys who was always flirting with her? You could probably put together a case for one of them exactly the same you put together for Douglas Mauser. There was also another theory that would be presented that there is potential drug involvement in this case, that apparently her brother, according to some, sold drugs out of this house. And that maybe Jenna saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and so one of these drug people came back to the house and killed her. They also had evidence that Jenna had been friends with someone who was a sex offender. Could this person have done it to her? The same evidence you can say against him, you can say about Doug. I think the point I'm just getting at is that whether or not I personally feel or you personally feel if Doug Mauser actually did this, could you with beyond a reasonable doubt state that he did do this? And I know I couldn't say that. And I don't think you could either. We could sit here and say, well, it's the stepdad. Obviously, it's the stepdad. The stepdad has killed their stepkids all the time in the past. We've covered story after story about this. Parents have murdered their children. It's a thing that unfortunately happens. But does that mean that's what happened here? I'm not sitting here saying and defending Douglas Mauser. I'm not really sitting here not defending him. It's sort of like in the middle. I want to think they got this right, but based on the evidence, I don't see how they could have come to the conclusion they came to. It feels almost like desperation from the prosecution to have this case solved ASAP. There is a certain level of pressure that comes with that job, the pressure that comes with the job of being a homicide detective. You got to assure the community there isn't a killer out there still. You got to tell them and convince them that this person is the one and he's now off the streets. And so, I'm left with, I don't know. I don't know. There's part of me that agrees he's guilty. There's a part of me that says, no, he's not. And that's reasonable doubt, folks. Unfortunately, that's just the way the system works. And I feel like the system failed Doug in that regard. Not that he isn't guilty. It's just that you got to have better evidence than what they had. So Douglas was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He has been up for parole a couple of times, I think. The most recent time, basically, he's never owned up to it. He has never admitted he did it, which therefore means he has never shown any remorse for the actions of this crime he may or may not have committed. Is he just being stubborn about it and saying, I'm never going to admit it even though I did? Or is he just not saying he's going to admit it because he didn't do it? But the parole board has turned him down every time. I know Jenna's biological parents or her biological father attends these parole board hearings anytime it comes up with him, and he's making sure that he stays in prison. And I understand, I get it. I get it from that I'm not a father, obviously, but I can understand that perspective of him not wanting his daughter's killer to be out there again. I completely understand it. I sympathize with it, and it's just a sad situation all around. And so at the end of all of this, 14-year-old Jenna Lynn Gamble is murdered by someone. Her life is taken from her by, was it Doug, or was it by a stranger or someone else she knew? And a person is in prison still for her murder. But then I pose this as a question: did Jenna Gamble truly get the justice she rightfully deserved? But that is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new here, I tell multiple true crime stories here on YouTube every single week. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. Give this video a like and leave a comment so more people can see the video. I think it helps with the algorithm or whatever. And also, I do tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. That's where I'm more known. The links to my TikTok is in the description of this video below in the link tree, or you can search Making a True Crimerer as you see it on this page, and you'll find it pretty easily. So feel free to follow that if you like. I do post compilation videos, however, at the beginning of each month from my previous month of TikTok videos that are usually like 3 or 4 hours long. And then if there is a case you want me to cover, in that link tree below, you'll also find my case list, which is now over 7,100 names. And so if you scroll through it, it's most alphabetical for the most part, and you don't see a name on that list that you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is listed below in the description as well. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I do typically choose my cases at random. However, if you are a loved one to a murdered or missing family member or loved one, let me know in that email that you are a direct relative, and that way I can make sure that case gets a higher priority if you want it to be. Just let me know that as well. But outside of that, that is it for this video, True Crime Roonies. And so, until the next case, ta-ta for now. No. Okay. But that is it for this video, True Crime Rooney Dooney Ding Dongs. So, as I end every video, who wants to watch me eat my fist? I'm gonna fist my... That was not the correct word choice. Fist myself. Okay, bye. Sorry. Okay, I'm weird. Anyway. Fuck. Ouch. I hurt my wrist doing that. That's how you know you're getting old, right? When you just, like, breathe the wrong way and just your wrist hurts. Like, this is not related. Not related at all, but... Ow, I just threw out my wrist. God, getting old is so annoying. I'm almost 40. I'm going to be 40 in less than a year. Basically, I'm near death. I'll be dead within... How long does a person live? 42 years or something? I don't got much time left. So, you know, that's basic science and math. Don't hold me to it. Or do. Or don't. I don't know. Maybe it's an X-file. What? What am I doing? Anyway, that's it for this video, True Crimers. Yeehaw? Nope. 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 No yeehaws, Mike. As always, it's awkward to say goodbye. Goodbye, so long to you, my friends. Goodbye, until we meet again. That's from a song, a show I used to like when I was babysitting my nieces and nephews. I don't know where it came from. What the fuck am I doing? I don't know. Okay, bye.